Hello. In this presentation, I would like to talk about an exhibition project that my colleague Eliane Camargo and I developed from the DoBeS archive data on the language and culture of the Cashinahua. The exhibition was shown in Belém in northern Brazil in 2018, and members of the Cashinahua community substantially contributed to it. Our interest in such a project was guided by the following questions. How can the results of a documentation project be made available to a broader public? And the second question, how can members of the indigenous community participate and engage with such an audience? Now I would like to shortly talk about some background and preliminaries of the project. I would like to present the Cashinahua community, or Huni Kuin, as they call themselves. I would like to talk about the research that has been done on language and culture. And I would like to present the DoBeS archive and other results of the DoBeS project. The Cashinahua are a Panoan group, and they live at the Peruvian-Brazilian border. Nowadays, there are around 13,500 members of the group, and in Peru live 2,500, which is the group we were actually focusing on in our project. The language is endangered. Most Cashinahuas are bilinguals with Portuguese or Spanish, and some Cashinahuas have shifted to Portuguese. The political situation is complex due to the fact that they live in two different countries. There are village schools in the Cashinahua villages, and these schools are run by bilingual Cashinahua teachers, or in the case of the Peruvian Cashinahuas, also by Spanish-speaking Peruvian teachers, so non-Cashinahua teachers. The history of the Cashinahua is exemplary for a number of indigenous groups in Brazil. So during the rubber boom, they worked as slave laborers in the rubber extraction. That was in the end of the 19th century. This led to the separation of one of the Cashinahua groups, the people who lived along the Envira River, who fled to Peru. So before that, there hadn't been any Cashinahuas living on the Peruvian territory. These Cashinahuas lived in relative isolation for several decades and later were contacted by loggers, missionaries, researchers, and they also got in contact with an uncontacted group in the 1990s, I think. We have a recording on this, which we also were showing in the exhibition. As I said, nowadays the Cashinahuas are integrated in two national systems with regard to education. Also, there are two orthographies, one on the Brazilian side, the other on the Peruvian side. There are different indigenous associations and so on. Here you can see the research on the language and culture, which started quite early. The first bilingual text collection was published in 1914 by a Brazilian historian, Capistrano de Abreu, who worked with two young Cashinahua men in Rio de Janeiro. The book was written in Cashinahua with a Portuguese word-by-word translation, and the problem was that the orthography had been developed by Capistrano. At that time, he was following standards that were based on phoneme-grapheme correspondences from German and French. This was also the reason for the DoBeS Cashinahua project to come into being. A Brazilian Cashinahua leader at that time approached my colleague Eliane and asked her to set up a project that would help his community to be able to read Capistrano's orthography. The result of this, of our project, you should be able to see here, is a bilingual textbook in a modern orthography with a prose Portuguese translation next to the original publication by Capistrano de Abreu. The other researchers listed here mostly work with the Peruvian group, which is the group, as I said, we also focused on during our work. Now I would like to say something about the archive and its use. So we recorded on audio and video myths, autobiographies, information on cultural practices, ritual chanting, which is a subject very much of interest for the Cashinahua themselves. We partially annotated and translated the data. We also integrated older material by Barbara Keifenheim and Eliane Camargo, and also photographs taken by Harald Schulz from a situation when the Peruvian Cashinahua were recently contacted. The archive material is mostly used by an academic public. It is mostly open source, and an example is the DoReco project. Although we used a trilingual archive structure in Portuguese, Spanish, and English, it is not very user-friendly for the indigenous community members due to their different categorization principles and their restricted access to the internet. Therefore, we still use external hard drives, which we hand out to community members. Other DoBeS results you can see here. We held workshops on language and culture in the Cashinahua villages. 2 members of the group. During these workshops, we developed together a meta-language to talk about the language in the language. We also republished Capistrano's book, as I showed before, and we published a Cashinahua textbook, which was mostly developed by members of the Cashinahua group. And from this textbook, we took citations, which we integrated into the exhibition. And then, of course, we published some educational material. A dictionary is in progress. And now I come to the exhibition project. Here you get some impressions from the exhibition. These are the 2 young Cashinahua men who were invited to Belém and participated. The exhibition took place from the 1st of February to the 25th of March of 2018 in Belém. It was shown in the former governor's palace, which now is the Museum of the State of Pará, in the historical center of the city. It was financed by the Goethe Institute, by the German Academic Exchange Service, by the museum itself, and by IPE, which is a cultural association. Further support was given from the researchers of the Museo Paraense Emílio Göldi and from the Federal University of Pará. And the 2 Cashinahua members who participated actively in the exhibition were Ulisio Moisés from Brazil and Alberto Jorge Toribio from Peru. They also had been members of the DoBeS research team, and in Belém they offered guidance tours. They trained the museum guides by showing them the exhibition. They also were responsible for the cultural program during the opening of the exhibition and participated in the academic framework program. Older community members had produced artifacts, which we also showed in the exhibition. And a group of Peruvian community members had chosen the photographs taken by Harald Schulz, which we could show in the exhibition. Now I would like to give you some impressions of the exhibition by showing this short film.
É muito bom que a gente pode recuperar aquilo que a gente não sabe, como ayahuasca, espupimá, tirim, tudo aquilo que a gente ainda não sabe, como nova geração. Então podemos manter a nossa cultura, nosso costume tradicional, nossa festa tradicional.
Essa exposição começou aqui em Belém do Pará, né? Mas por que Belém do Pará? Os Cashinahuas vivem no Acre e no Peru. É um elo direto entre a história dos Cashinahuas e essa cidade aqui.
Então, se faz parte, vai entrar para o Arquivo Nacional, né, da Diversidade Cultural e Linguística no Brasil.
Como tirim, Cashinahuas, espupimá, ¿no? Muchas cosas, actividades realizaban y hasta ahora nosotros ya no tenemos, ¿no? O sea que olvidemos. Más que todo nuestro anciano se está acabando, ¿no? También nuestra cultura, nuestra costumbre se acaba, ¿no? Como hemos estado aquí con los nahuas, mostramos a nossa língua na Universidade Federal do Pará e muitos linguistas assistiram a gente e deram importância, conheceram a nossa língua. Então essa exposição é para isso, para mostrar a nossa cultura, a cultura Cashinahua, para que todos os brasileiros saibam que cada povo existe sua cultura, cada povo existe sua cultura tradicional.
Muitas das fotos foram escolhidas por eles. Eles tiveram uma participação relativamente dinâmica dentro dessa exposição, mesmo estando longe. A cada vez que voltava a campo, a gente voltava com uma pequena maquete. Vamos tentar fazer isso, o que vocês acham? Então, viram também o filme, o pequeno filme, ficaram muito contentes.
So here you can see the goals of the exhibition project in more detail. We wanted to use the archive material to promote a dialogue between the Cashinahua community members and the Brazilian public, also between the Cashinahuas and an academic public. We wanted to promote interest in the history of this indigenous group in a place which is highly influenced by the indigenous culture, as I said in the film, and which obtained its former wealth from the rubber exploitation, which is actually what happened to the Cashinahua when they were enslaved in the rubber plantations. We also wanted to promote an awareness regarding the existence of different indigenous groups, which have got different cultures. Another goal was to develop an exhibition structure to enhance the awareness of the broader public of the interconnections between the Cashinahuas history and the history of the state of Pará during the culture boom. And in the end, we wanted to connect the exhibits to tell an exemplary story, a story of autonomy and contact to a non-academic audience. Now I would like to talk about some opportunities and challenges. So first, the challenges, like the choice of the objects. We were mostly concentrating on photos, some videos, ritual chanting. The artifacts were contributed by the community, mostly head ornaments. And we also had an interview with Barbara Keifenheim, who talks about a study on the group that up to that moment and up to now has only been published in German. We also showed a film by Harald Schulz. As to the participants, I already mentioned that we invited two Cashinahua community members, one from Peru, the other one from Brazil. There were hot debates in the social media due to this fact that we decided to invite these two people and no other people, especially the Brazilian Cashinahuas were not very happy with our choice, but we actually chose two descendants from the Peruvian group because we mostly worked with the Peruvian group. And another challenge was the restricted budget. So in fact, I had to save up budget from the years before to be able to finance this exhibition with the Goethe budget. Some opportunities, there was interaction between the Cashinahuas and the Brazilian society. And this was very important, especially with regard to current political developments in this country. The Cashinahuas, the two that we had invited, were also interacting with the academic community in Belém. You could see some examples in the film. We managed to show some scientific results which had not been available to the Cashinahua and not to the Brazilian public as well, such as the interview with Barbara Keifenheim, which we translated into Portuguese. The photographs by Harald Schulz also hadn't been shown to a general public yet. And the film by Harald Schulz we could show with a license from the Filmarchiv Göttingen. A side effect of this project was also that the two participants that we had invited learned from each other because they came from different places and they had been told different things by their elders. So where do we need to go from here? Personally, we do not think that there's a model for relationship building because each indigenous community has got different expectations, and maybe we can talk about guidelines. So one thing I think is very important for being able to set up a project like this, which is simply a long-term relationship, because a long-term relationship helps to build up mutual trust. Another thing which needs to be taken into account is a certain flexibility from the non-indigenous researchers' side. So the goals should be set up together. And another focus, which we really find very important, is that the information has to be an information exchange. So we get some information and we give some information. In general, we think that documentation work in the Amazon is always political, especially in the current situation where the promotion of indigenous languages and cultures is not encouraged, but highly wanted by the indigenous groups. So we think that it's important to use the data to shape awareness in the national societies. And our goal now for the future is that we might be able to show the exhibition in other Brazilian and Peruvian cities. Here you have a short bibliography. If you want to read more about the exhibition project, you can do this in the Boletim do Museu Paraense Emílio Göldi. It's in English. And thank you very much for your attention.